How do you trust God when you don't trust God? I mean, you know in your mind that you should trust God. You tell other people that they should trust God. We sing songs in church about trusting God, but when you look at your circumstances and your past experiences and what is going on in your life, they all tell you that God cannot be trusted. That's coming up today. Hey, my friend, welcome to The Beat. My name is Alan Parr. Thank you so much for tuning in. If this is your first time here, it's a pleasure. If you enjoy this video, consider subscribing and hit that little bell notification so you won't miss a beat. So today we're talking about how you can trust God when you really don't trust God. And we're going to jump right in. There is a man in the Old Testament named Habakkuk, and in verse 1, it tells us that this guy is a prophet, which lets us know that whether you are a prophet, a preacher, a pastor, or a pew member, that trusting God can be a struggle no matter who you are, no matter what stage of your Christian life that you are in. So let's take a look at the context of this book so that we can see exactly why Habakkuk was struggling in his faith. Chapter 1 verse 2 says this: "Violence is everywhere, I cry, but you do not come to save. Must I forever see these evil deeds? Why must I watch all this misery? Wherever I look, I see destruction and violence. I am surrounded by people who love to argue and fight. The law has become paralyzed, and there is no justice in the courts. The wicked far outnumber the righteous, so that justice has become perverted." So imagine being part of a society where the law was simply not being carried out. There was no justice. The wicked were getting away with crimes. People around you were getting killed. They were getting slaughtered. People that were close to you were being murdered. And it seemed in the midst of all of this crazy chaos that God wasn't doing anything. And this is what frustrated the prophet Habakkuk. The first frustration that he had, which is very similar to the ones that we have, is, "God, you must not be listening to my prayers." Notice what he says here in chapter 1 verse 2. "How long, O Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen?" Have you ever felt this way? I mean, you feel like your prayers are not even getting past the ceiling, let alone reaching God's heavenly doors. And it seems like no matter what you do, no matter where you go, no matter how much you give, no matter how much you go to church, no matter what you do, you just cannot seem to get a prayer to God, and it seems like God is not listening. Well, verse 5 teaches us something else. It says here, "The Lord replied." Now we'll get into what he talked about later, but this is proof here that even though we at times don't think that God is listening to us, he hears us, he sees us, he knows us, and he is in tune with exactly what's going on in our lives, even if we do not get the answers from God that we want. Habakkuk's second frustration is found in verse 2, and he says, "Hey, look, okay, maybe you are listening to me, but you don't care about us because you are not doing anything, God." Notice what he says here. He says, "Violence is everywhere, I cry, but you do not come to save." Have you ever felt that way? I mean, God, I am trying to get in touch with you. I'm crying out. I'm doing everything I possibly know how to do, and my circumstances have not yet changed, which has led me to the conclusion that, God, even if you hear me, you just must not care. Well, notice what God's reply here is in verse 5. It says, "For I am doing something in your own day, something that you wouldn't believe even if someone told you about it. I am raising up the Babylonians, a cruel and violent people." So God graciously gives Habakkuk a sneak peek, a little bit of insight into his divine plan. He says, "Hey, I am in the midst of doing something, even though you may not agree with it, you may not like it." Basically, what he's saying is this: I am in the midst of raising up an evil generation, an evil nation called the Babylonians, and I am going to use that evil nation to come and discipline and punish my own people. This leads to Habakkuk's third complaint, his third frustration, which is very similar to what we experience, which is, "God, this is not fair. I don't understand your plan." Notice what he says here in response to God. He says in verse 12, "O Lord my God, my Holy One, you who are eternal, surely you do not plan to wipe us out. O Lord, our rock, you have sent these Babylonians to correct us, to punish us for our many sins, but you are pure and cannot stand the sight of evil. Will you wink at their treachery?" He's saying, hey, how can you use them to punish us whenever they are much more sinful than we are? How can you look past their sin and not do something to punish them, but yet you're going to punish us? He says, God, I don't understand that plan. I don't agree with that plan. I don't like that plan. And this leads to to God's third response to Habakkuk, which is found in chapter 2, verse 3, and it says this vision is for a future time. It describes the end, and it will be fulfilled. If it seems slow in coming, wait patiently, for it will surely take place. It will not be delayed. So God is saying, Habakkuk, I know that you can't understand what's going on right now. That's because it's not meant for you to understand right now. He says this vision is for some time in the future. Right now, it's not going to make sense, but over time, my divine plan will come to pass. You know, there are many things in my life that I can just say that at the time when I was in the midst of going through the craziness and the chaos, it did not make sense, and I was frustrated, I was angry, I was confused, and I was crying out to God, why do I have to go through this? And then oftentimes it was years later in my life that I was able to look back in my past and see exactly what God was up to all along. And so sometimes the things that we're dealing with in our lives are not meant for us to understand right now. They will be revealed and clear later, and sometimes we may not ever get the answer to our question, why? Perhaps the greatest verse in this entire book is in chapter 2, verse 4, which says, the righteous will live by faith. Now, what exactly does that look like? Habakkuk clearly spells it out for us in chapter 3, verses 17 through 19, three of the most beautiful verses in all of Scripture. He says this, even though the fig trees have no blossoms, and there are no grapes on the vine, and even though the olive crop fails, and the fields lie empty and barren, even though the flocks die in the fields, and the cattle barns are empty, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in the God of my salvation. The sovereign Lord is my strength. He makes me as sure-footed as a deer. This may be one of the most beautiful pictures of faith, because Habakkuk is saying, God, okay, I get it. My circumstances around me aren't making sense. Everywhere I look, there is no growth. There's nothing positive happening, but yet I will still praise you. I will still rejoice even in the midst of my dark situation. So one of the things that I love about the story of Habakkuk is that it lets us know that God invites us to bring our pain, our frustration, our confusion, our hurt, our disappointment to Him. He doesn't cast us away. He meets us right where we are in the midst of the craziness and the chaos of life. So how do you trust God when you don't trust God? Well, number one, know that He hears you and sees you every time you cry out to Him. Second of all, even though you may not see what He's doing, know that He is always working behind the scenes. And then finally, accept the fact that there are some things about God's plan that we just won't understand. If you found this video helpful in any way, feel free to share it with a friend. Also, if you haven't done so already, I would love it if you would subscribe. Check out some of the other videos on this channel. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time on The Beat.